Perfect. And okay, so we are here. I'm just going to introduce the both of us and then read out the question, and then we'll go ahead with your take on it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so the presentation is by Anirudh and Rituja. The current question on board for us today is: some have argued that higher cigarette prices do not deter smoking. While there are many arguments both for and against this view, some find the following argument to be the most persuasive of all. The law of supply and demand indicates that higher prices are ineffective in reducing smoking. In particular, higher cigarette prices will reduce the demand of cigarette. This reduction in demand will push the equilibrium price down to its original level. Since the equilibrium price will remain unchanged, smokers will consume the same number of cigarettes. Do you agree or disagree with this view? Discuss and explain your answer with your partner. Go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, equilibrium price is like a price at which the quantity of a product, um, which is demanded by consumers, equals the quantity supplied by producers. So I think uh, that it is assuming the argument is assuming that the equilibrium price will um, adjust immediately. So I think it ignores a lot of um, other situations, um, like for example, in short term, um, the demand of cigarettes when the price will increase will obviously reduce, but then the supply of the cigarettes won't immediately change. It's going to take some time. So um, that's when once the supply will reach the demand, then the equilibrium price will not impact. But then it forgets about the time that it will take for the supply to adjust. Also, the supply will depend on a lot of other factors too. So it's not going like over a period of time, either people can just get adjusted to the prices based on their behavioral patterns, or people might actually reduce smoking. So such assumptions are missed out in the argument.
True. I do agree with your view to some extent. That the argument doesn't necessarily factor in the type of the product that it is looking for an equilibrium price with, because smoking itself is based around nicotine addiction and the nicotine trap,
Yeah.
which which would lead me to believe no matter how expensive cigarettes got, people would still smoke. And from personal experience, I happen to be a regular smoker, and this was a good example of this would be COVID-19, when basically the supply demand curve was tested in physical senses, where the demand for cigarettes went higher, the prices for cigarettes went higher, but the quantity of cigarettes produced and that were being shipped out to India at that point was reduced. While the quantity never really matched up to the price demand at that point. The price just kept getting higher. But that is under dire circumstances like COVID, where shipping and transportation and export becomes essentially uh, a very troublesome task.
Mhm.
As far as the argument goes by itself, I uh, I do agree with this view to a certain degree, because for example, if cigarette companies were to increase prices at a steady level, then demand, instead of matching the cigarette price level or asking the cigarette companies to push back and reduce prices, what would essentially happen is the smokers would quit and move to a different cigarette brand, if not then a different form of nicotine consumption, which we have seen a later trend of, where cigarettes, because of their harmful views or whatever, vapes have now become more popular, or chewing tobacco, or things like that. A good thing for cigarette companies to note, and which they already make note of, is that cigarettes are not the sole form of nicotine on market. So they have a higher competition range apart from regular cigarette producers. Hence,
Yeah.
why I agree with the view posted in the discussion question that the demand for cigarettes will bring the prices back down to its original equilibrium price.
Okay. So one additional point on what you said about companies, there will be competition. But in addition to competition, in the case of cigarettes, it also involves government regulation and taxes. So that can impact um, both the supply and demand. So um, if they impose more taxes and regulate, if the government imposes more taxes and regulations, then the equilibrium price um, of supply like will be less applicable.
True. When there are factors motivating the outcome, obviously the outcome would differ, especially with something like price elasticity to demand, which is already a pretty hypothetical concept measured in metrics. But what uh, what I want to say is, while that situation works very effectively in hypothetical situations where a government entity can come and increase taxes and hence produce a different pricing range for cigarettes, that would not happen because tobacco products even now are heavily taxed, and that
Mm,
tax makes for some of the most a large chunk of, what do you say, economy. Like for us back in India, Nic- tobacco and alcohol products make up for so much of our tax bracket that the government banned vapes instead of banning cigarettes because cigarettes were more profitable.
yeah.
Which, as a consumer health wise concern, that is very, very concerning from a country. But see, government tends to not involve with the taxation so much because it's already a heavily taxed price. And generally, when tax goes up, it'll only if you get it does not affect the base price.
Mm,
So the consumer still tends to buy even with the higher tax. I have been what do you say? I have been a criminal about this because, well, when cigarette prices initially, if you did remember back in India, one cigarette, so they sell like single cigarettes in India, right? One cigarette was 12 rupees back when I was in engineering. So that was about 8 years ago. And then by the time I left engineering in 2 years, I discontinued. Cigarettes were like 18 bucks. And I, I just kept smoking. And that price increase was due to government changes and taxation with nicotine products at that time. But as a smoker, I just kept changing. I wished for them to be cheaper, but I just continued to do so. It was very
mm.
weird.
Yeah, so then and the I don't have any experience about this, but then I think based on what points you made, I believe that it heavily depends on the behavior of the consumers, uh, and not really on other factors. Like more importance goes to the behavior of the
I
consumers.
absolutely agree with you on that because, well, the discussion question over here takes into conversation something that is not regulated by regular product consuming habits, I would say. Things like alcohol and cigarettes, I don't feel like they can be measured in such metrics because
Yeah.
nicotine addiction will throw price elasticity of demand out of the window any day of the week.
Mm. Yeah.
But if I were to view this as just another product, then our arguments would still stand. And what I'm more fascinated about is what would overall change the supply demand, what do you say,
The curve.
that curve itself, the equilibrium price. What would affect the equilibrium price is what I'm more fascinated by. As to, in this case, it just takes into account the price and the quantity.
Yeah.
And Well, I think we'll learn that moving forward in the course. But yeah, I feel like this has been a productive discussion. Let's see, how long have we been in this? Any idea?
I think it's been 5 minutes at least because we started around 8.
Well, okay, let's just do
Obviously.
a conclusion statement and that should put us in a good purview. All right.
Yeah, okay. You
You
want
want
to
to go
go first?
first?
Okay.
Okay, sure. I'll go
Um,
first. So, I was disagreeing with the discussion post altogether in a real life sense because personally, coming from my personal experiences, yes, the price elasticity of the equilibrium price would definitely ask like signal to the cigarette companies to reduce the price to match the demand so that they can be producing the most amount of cigarettes for the most amount of price that the consumer demands. But in a real life sense, I don't think that would be possible to a certain degree as prices increase and companies test their waters. Consumers will still tend to consume. So let's say if a pack of cigarettes right now is $11, different different companies might try to increase it to say 12, maybe 15, try to push their luck and see. But consumers will still consume because it is not a product regulated by regular consumer habits. Hence, why my disagreement with it. But on an education level, I do agree with it. How about you?
yeah. So, um, okay. Let me just reframe it.
Sure.
What I think is, um, like I agree with you. The consumers will not stop smoking because of the behavioral habits. So while the laws of supply and demand are fundamental and the equilibrium price might remain unchanged, but there are a lot of other factors that this argument hasn't taken into consideration, um, which will impact the equilibrium price. So um, the law of supply and demand directly won't remain the same. As we were discussing, we are not sure uh, how the curves might change, but we'll learn them in the future.
All right.
But I
Seems like it.
disagree with the argument.
Fair enough. All right. Just stop sharing my screen. Let's stop recording.